As this is called, it's called series is called Contemporary Art for Dummies, and I can assure you that if you think you're a dummy about contemporary art, then I'm certainly happy to join your club, because even though I've been looking at this and at contemporary art for quite a number of years, I'm sure we would all agree that contemporary art, at least for me, is slippery, multifaceted, constantly shifting, daring and often baffling. You know, it's this range of enormous kind of different art practices which they all call contemporary art, and somehow you've got to try and make sense of it all. So I think that's the first thing to acknowledge, that that's what contemporary art is. You know, like it's not easy in many ways. It can always be broadly identified. I mean, we can walk into GOMA and say that's contemporary art, but it's not something that you can easily pin down in specifics, because it is so multifarious in so many ways. And the really important thing too, a very important thing about contemporary art, and I think this has been a big change, certainly at the end of the last century and the beginning of this century, is really what art is depends far more, depends a great deal more on the art museums, the curators, the art collectors, the critics, the theorists, the universities that support certain ideas about what contemporary art is. So I think that's a really important point to keep in mind, that there was an art movement in the 1960s called conceptual art, which we'll look at tomorrow, and in conceptual art in the 60s they said the meaning of art is not in the object. The meaning of art is in the social realm. It's the stuff that surrounds the object. And that, I think, is a really important thing to try and keep in mind as we're working our way through something like contemporary art. So as I say, contemporary art is no single thing. That's the thing about, you know, contemporary art. There's no single thing. And I just use that term because every time I go to New York, there's some new saying that the New Yorkers have, and the current one is that's the thing. So I thought I'd throw that in today. So, and that's because it's no single thing. As I said, it's hard to define as anything other than contemporary art. But at least I would like to, in this today and, you know, other days if you attend, at least we can try and build some kind of preliminary competencies about, you know, if we do, you know, I often go up to contemporary work of art and go, I've got no idea what that is. And I, you know, you can go to the wall label and you start to try and work that out, and you know, at other times I'll look at a work of art and I'll just go, you know, no way, I don't think that is a work of, I don't, how did that become a work of art? You know, how did it possibly do that? So I'm someone working in the industry for, you know, over 20 years, and I'm asking those questions all the time. But, you know, I will, if I'm with someone, we will start to try and work it, you know, and try and make sense of what it's supposed to be. So, to understand contemporary art, we have to start at the beginning in a way. We begin at the beginning. And as I just said, why is half the art that we see today considered to be art? Acker in Melbourne had a work by a woman where an artist who had a dog run. She just created a dog run and people could walk their dogs. And that was the artwork funded by, you know, the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art. So I'm sure, you know, I mean, I myself, as well as many other people, would think, well, you know, why is that a work of art? And, you know, obviously, Hirst, we might want to ask, and this is the work I'll show at the start and at the end today, we might want to ask, you know, why is this a work of art? I mean, he probably didn't make it, for starters. You know, if the criteria is an artist makes their own work, then you kind of might ask, well, you know, how can this possibly be art? It's a great piece of jewellery, but is it art? And I think that the question of why something like this is art and what makes us think and accept it as art is maybe is important, but I think maybe more important, and I think much more today, when someone approaches contemporary art, it's that question, how? How is it contemporary art? What is it about it? How does it work through being contemporary art? And so that's certainly, there's some preliminary things I'd like to say. And a few other things before we maybe start talking about things in a bit more detail. Now, as I said, and as we all know, contemporary art comes in many different shapes, sizes and actions, and appears in many different environments. It's a classical shape-shifting godlike thing, I guess. First thing about it, as most of you will know, is that it's decidedly global rather than national. And in fact, that's a really, I think, important point to make, that really a lot of the work that we are seeing now was produced in our period of globalisation, which of course they are now saying is ending with the election of Donald Trump and the rise of so-called national traditionalists versus internationalists, pluralists. It's not left and right anymore. They're now talking about national and international. And so in this great period of globalisation, a lot of contemporary art just reflected that historical period. And so that's the first thing we can say, and in many different ways. So it was global. In relation to style and genre, the other thing about artists like us, a lot of us still exist. A lot of us still are kind of fed this diet of, the artist cuts off his ear, he gives it to a prostitute. He's too much of a genius. The world doesn't understand him, so he shoots himself. But artists are they're a bit like surfing web shoppers. Like when we go on the web and we shop, well, in some ways, artists are the same. I mean, they're living in a digital age, for heaven's sake. So they're going to be doing the same thing. And in that way, art has become, in a sense, in a lot of contemporary art, a bit like a supermarket. So you might, go along in the supermarket of art and you see a Picasso and you go, I like a bit of that. And, you see canned Warhol, and so you have a bit of that. And there might be many other things, something from fashion, something from design, and you place them together in order to sort of work through what art can be and how art can be. I think it's a really important point. So it's eclectic and pluralistic, you would say, contemporary art. So I guess I'm saying all this because this is what we deal with. When we look at contemporary art, we're dealing with these kinds of contexts, with this kind of attitude behind the making of art in one way or another. So it's eclectic and pluralistic. It's also, artists have been called today post-avant-garde. So when I talk about Vincent van Gogh, he's the classic avant-gardist, the lone genius who sits outside of culture. And he's so far advanced and outside of culture that culture has to catch up with him at some point. That's classic kind of avant-gardism. But a lot of contemporary art is really understood as post-avant-garde, or it's been called post-avant-garde. And part of that is the idea that artists today, and I'm generalising, unfortunately I have to generalise in this talk, that they don't think they're going to change the world. The avant-garde, whole idea of avant-garde art was artists will change things. Artists are intellectual leaders and visual leaders and creative leaders of the world, and that their art can change things. Certainly most artists today don't think that's going to happen, right? That they're going to change the world. Nor do they think they can necessarily control the meaning of the art that they produce. They don't necessarily think, and again I'm generalising here and oversimplifying, but there's generally the recognition by artists that they'll produce something which they'll have in mind, but a disparate audience will look at what that artist does. And that artist won't even try and tell that audience how they're supposed to read that art. Artists are much more kind of hands-off and think, well, I can't control the meaning of the work. I'll let the audience do that in many ways. So that's another thing I think that I've noticed about that that people can make up their own minds about it. The other thing, if they're not there to change the world, for many art is a lucrative career. I mean, Warhol was very good. They asked Warhol, why did you get into business? Why did you get into art? Because it's a really good business. That's why I got into art. So there's much more of that idea. And I read it the other day. I was reading something, and it was Elton John's photography collection. And he was talking about it, and he started talking about Cindy Sherman. He said, I was at a dinner at the New Museum in New York, as you do, and while I was there, Cindy Sherman was at another table. And I said to Cindy, God, Cindy, I just can't seem to buy your work anywhere. And Cindy turned and said, oh, no problems. I've got to buy a new house. I've got a few artist prints. Why don't you buy those? Right? And so Elton was happy, and Cindy got her new house. But that example, I think, is a really good example, because compare that to Vincent van Gogh. You've got the artist has a very different understanding of who they are and what their work means in society, in a sense. So in many ways, perhaps they're less interested in cultural leadership, and perhaps they're more like all of us, impacted by things like neoliberalism and stuff like that, and that really they don't particularly think of themselves as special so much. They're not special as the way Van Gogh was a genius. Artists today are more special maybe as celebrities. So artists much more embrace that idea. As I was saying, Van Gogh's all about, I would never sell an artwork, that would destroy my creative authenticity and integrity. That's the kind of avant-garde idea. There's art and then there's culture. Art is autonomous from culture, and by being autonomous and different from culture, it protects its integrity. But that's just not around anymore. So the work we're seeing doesn't really adhere to those sorts of values. So the artist is a consumer, just like you and I. But where there are things at the avant-garde that still persist, and one of those things is challenging conventions. And the main convention contemporary artists do today is they challenge what art can be. What can art be? Can it be a dog run? Is part of that challenge. Well, of course it's art. It's an acca. Well, what else can I turn into art? And I think at the same time, by having that attitude, it's also kind of saying that artists are immersed in the culture. They're not trying to be distant from the culture or superior to the culture or have sort of an elitist kind of approach to culture. It's rather the acceptance, hey, they're in culture, and what is there in culture that they can use in art that hasn't been used before or pushed before? Yeah? So that's a kind of, in a way, that's a kind of residual avant-garde approach, to be kind of shocking the middle class or doing something new all the time. So when we look at something like this, I'll ask you, we know who this is, don't we? I mean, we all know what this is, right? We all know it's Picasso. The next question I'd want to ask you is, what movement was Picasso supposed to be a part of? Anyone know? Cubism? Fantastic, we know that. Sorry? More surrealism later on, but yeah, Cubism, fantastic. And I'm sure half of you had that idea in mind of Cubism. Why is Cubism so special? Anybody got a rough guide as to why people think Cubism was so great? About arts languages at all, that kind of a new understanding of art was presented? That's the argument generally, isn't it? Does anyone have a clue on what that might have been, a new way of understanding art? Okay, it's just art as a art understood as a visual mode or a visual language, and that it doesn't have to be naturalism to be art. So it's the idea that you don't have to just paint like Leonardo da Vinci to create art about what the world looks like. You can also say, I think the world looks like this. And when you do that, what you're doing with is you're breaking with a tradition in art that was 400 years old, which was... Sorry? And there's fragmentation in the work. So, it's argued in relation to that fragmentation that what's important about Cubism is that they were trying to present simultaneous vision. It's sort of the idea of, well, we don't see like Picasso and see something straight and static and then paint it. We're actually dynamically engaged with the world, and when we're seeing things, we are often seeing them in fragments. So you could actually argue, or as some did, that this is actually a more accurate rendition of the world as we actually experience it as fragments than something about like Leonardo da Vinci, right? So you can see why Cubism in that sense was considered really important. And so, this is why Picasso is considered good, because he did something revolutionary. We look at it and we go, that's Picasso, that's Cubism. Even if we don't know a lot about Cubism, we've got a fair idea that that's what he represents. Now, I'll show you another work here by an artist, a contemporary artist, called Charlene von Heil, who's a German artist. And I guess my question is exactly the same, or similar questions. We know who did the work. What kind of movement do you think and this is a lose-lose yes, a lose-lose answer to this question. What sort of art movement does this woman represent? Just give me an instinctive answer. It's absolutely fine. Well, there's a bit of that. Anything else? Bit of that, bit of surrealism. Already we're building a picture, aren't we? Here we've got two different movements, and there's a lot to come. There is no one movement. There's a mix and match. It's like a smorgasbord. This work is like a smorgasbord. So let me tell you a bit more about this then, right? And she's not of any movement. It's not like Picasso. You can look at it and go, hey, that's Cubism. You look at Van Hyle and you go, what is it? And Cubism, that's good because they presented a revolutionary visual language, a visual regime that no one had sort of understood before. This is kind of new and radical. But why is this good? Well, I don't know, tell me. And if it is good, which it clearly is because it's presented, she's supported by international curators and she has shows, and she's got shows in a big gallery in New York. You might, obviously it is good, but we've got to ask ourselves, how is it good, I guess? And when you look at it, as both answers said, both with abstract expressionism and with surrealism, the painting doesn't seem to be anything in particular. Is it design? Is it just about design? Because there's patterning on there, isn't there? That sort of, there's a harlequin side of pattern. Is it about clowns? I mean, who's to know? Is it about, it might be a portrait because it looks like it's probably a woman. If it is a woman, well, if it is a portrait, well, it looks like a woman. There's long hair there, but that's no guarantee. But we'd assume it's a portrait. Then who's it a portrait of? You're not given a face, right? Is it about women? Is it about a kind of feminist sensibility? Well, it could be that as well. It's many things, is what I can say first of all. And I think what's really important why I looked at the Cubism is if we've got abstract expressionism and surrealism, we've already got something that's pluralistic. It's many things. So that's the first thing which one might want to say is post-avant-garde about it, because it rejects the idea of a singular style as being something that represents who you are. Van Gogh, he was kind of an expressionistic painter. That's what he did. But with Van Hyle, she's not dedicated to one particular style. You see that? Like it's a kind of mix and match kind of idea. So, I'm sure you're all thinking, yeah, but why would she do this? Why is she kind of doing this mix and match sort of deal? Well, she's rejecting singular style, and so she's mixing them all up. Figuration, abstraction, patterning, they're all mixed up. They're all eclectic. And it's more, rather than decoration, it's more about having a decorative sensibility in a work like this. And I think the other thing too, and I think what's really important about this, and it's a bit more complicated point, but if you get it, then it really helps the way you look at contemporary painting, at least, because you can at least say this much: it's painting. Well, it is kind of. It's acrylic. It's acrylic and oil on linen. So okay, it's a painting. But it's also charcoal on linen, so it's a drawing. So is it a drawing? Is it a painting? No, it's a painting drawing, or maybe it's a drawing painting. So again, it's not, Picasso is a painter, but Van Hyle is many things combined together to put things together. So the other thing too, and I can see already time's killing me, is that what she does here, you could say that in avant-garde painting, as I said, painting was figurative or abstract, expressionistic or impressionistic. In 1935, you ask someone, what are you as an artist? I'm a surrealist. Do you do anything else? No, I'm a surrealist. I live surrealism. I am surrealism. What you really get here is this idea of, Well, painting can be surrealist, painting can be abstract, painting can be figurative, painting can be about patterning. So what I'm going to do is I'm put them all in, because I'm looking at the supermarket of art history and I'm putting them all in here in the one work. So that is to say, and I'm trying to find my spot, is that this is a work about abstract form. This is work about figuration. This is a work about patterning, rather than being something that is abstraction, that is patterning. It's something that's more about that. To try and use another example to help us with it, it's the idea, I am a surrealist. That's like an existential statement, I couldn't be anything else. I must only be a surrealist because that is what I am as I exist. A kind of existential commitment. But here, styles really are something you wear. It's like identity. It's like that idea of transgender and stuff like that. That even sexual identity is something you wear, something that you can change. And this is much the sort of thing that you see here as well. So Warhol is another really good example. We know this work, we know who it is. Do we know what movement it was a part of? What art movement? Pop art, thank you. So he's a member of the pop art movement. I think the really tough question is, why is Warhol considered to be good? Does anyone want to offer an... Well, original? How was he original? Okay, that's a really nice point. He's considered important because he makes his art like any mass-produced object. Yep. So he doesn't make his art. Well, he does, as you say, he makes it up, but it's screen printing. So he had a factory in New York, and it's often rumoured that other people made his work, and he would just sign it at the end in order to make it his. So in that way, he's original in the sense in which he does not adopt an avant-garde attitude where, he has to make stuff. In fact, he is someone who borrows from something else. And I think with this sort of work, and just in response to what you said there, which is a really good point, I think also what Warhol's saying there is that, well, I do art. It could be advertising, it could be fashion, it could be graphic design. It's probably a bit of all of them. And I'm going to integrate them and use them all in because art is not superior anymore to all those other cultural forms in a consumer culture. It's just another form like that. Yeah. And the same thing with someone like Jeff Koons, who is a postmodern artist. And I think we'll just look at Muick maybe at the end. But so this Koons again, just to ask you in relation to that, does anyone know about postmodernism? What postmodernism was supposed to be, or what it represented, or what it looked like? No one knows. It's supposed to be very pluralistic, right? So it borrows from a lot of different areas to make something art. Yes. So where do you think perhaps Koons has borrowed? What sort of tradition might Koons have borrowed from and taken into art and then turned into art? Anyone want to have a go? Portraiture, yes, in fact, photographic portraiture. Great point. So he's looked at, pop photography or whatever in culture and he's gone, okay, I'll use that as the model. That's right. And of course, it's portraiture of what kind of, what was it about Michael Jackson? Celebrities. So like Warhol, he's doing Monroe, and here's Koons and he's doing Jackson. Also, it's a pieta. He's using a religious, that's a famous image in Catholic iconography of the Virgin Mother with, with the dying Jesus. So he has, he's using commensurate imagery of Michael Jackson and a chimp, with Catholic iconography, which is just to say that the value system of imagery changes. So we'll rush it along and show something from which is in this show. So I'll try and interrogate you a bit more. Thanks for the contribution so far, and maybe you'll be a bit more familiar with this as well to help you along the way. So one might ask, in what way is this work traditional, do you think? What other art in the past, and I'm not talking about style necessarily, I'm not necessarily saying it's Renaissance, it might be some kind of medium way of working. In what way do you think this is traditional? It's a portrait, that's right. And what sort of portraits might we see in the public sphere, for instance? In parks or something like that, that famous people, stuff like that. So you've got that idea of monumental sculpture, which is a traditional thing, because this woman doesn't look like a Cubist painting, does she? What tradition of depiction would you call something like this? Anyone have a clue? The Renaissance and Da Vinci, I was talking about before. It's kind of called naturalism. That is, it looks like something that looks like when you look out of a window. So that's kind of called naturalism. It kind of imitates the world in that sort of way. So even though this guy is producing work in 2008 in a post-avant-garde era, right, he's still, like many artists, he's drawing on this history of art and culture in order to produce something here. And what maybe art styles? Are there any art styles you can think of that, we've already looked at an example of it already. Exactly, great point. Yes, surrealism, scale. As you say, it's out of all proportion. It's like nightmarish or dreamlike scale, straight right out of surrealism. But as you also said, it's realism. That's like another term for naturalism. It's also realistically rendered. So there's pop artists like Dwayne Hansen who used to make sculptural models of people. So it kind of fits into that tradition. But you're right. So surrealism is a really important point there. And why would this be popular, do you think? Why do you think people would like this kind of work? And people do, they love it. Why? Yes, this intriguing, and also it can be terrifying. But are there other responses to something like this?
It is a scene that is very common, yet because of its scale, it's very confronting.
Fantastic. It is. Mum and Dad, the kids can look at this, and Mum can see herself. It's art for the everyday person from their lives. Yes, you've got that lovely twist, as you said, with surrealism, and as you said as well, with kind of weirded out scale. But it's also it's about the people looking at the work, and that's really, really important. So even though there might be massive scale, the fact is they're not looking at a work of art where they've got to go. Where was that thing on Cubism in my second year art history unit? That I've got to try to look at so that I can understand this properly, right? It's just you look at it and you relate to it straight away, so it's very accessible.
But also with this piece I found, she's looking at you, and it doesn't matter where you are in that room, she's looking at you.
Right, okay, so that's a nice point because it's about an engagement. You're engaged with sculpture. It's not something like I do in every gallery I go to. I go in artwork and I have to get into that's right, something like this, and I start pretending I'm an intellectual while I'm looking at it. But it's a passive, I'm consuming and showing everybody else I know a lot about art. But as you say, here is you're engaged with that work. You're interacting with that work.
No, but what I'm saying is I felt that she is actually looking at you.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's quite frightening.
Yeah, I know there's portraits like that, aren't there, where they think that. But again, that artwork is, as you say, looking at you, so you are engaged with it in a sense, whether you like it or not, like you've got that sort of aspect. And of course, the other thing here is it's not just her that's usually shown, is it? There's a video. I've seen this work before here, where there's a video actually showing you how he made it. Have anyone seen that? Yeah, so why would they show you the video of how,
Almost like a manifesto.
what do you mean by that? With
Well, it's you're seeing the subject and you wonder why or how. So the video is explaining this to you by looking at the object.
And what is the how of that video treats? I mean, what is it showing you?
It's showing you the reality, the finished reality.
And how he made it, right? Because when you look at some of this, every hair is on the arms. It's just a stunning work. In fact, I call this wow art, right? And unfortunately, I have to stop on this work, but I think that's one other thing which is characteristic of contemporary art, not all of it. It's art as a spectacle, and it's art which is entertaining. So artists have broken with that idea that the audience has to learn about how good the artist is or what the artist thinks in order for them to enjoy the work. Now what you get far more is the artist says, I'm going to create work that is entertaining and accessible to you, because in our culture, everyone's getting entertained. So art is just fitting in with that sort of culture and providing you with the spectacle. Producing fireworks, which I'll talk about with the Chinese artist Zai and stuff like that. It is, our contemporary artists are much more willing to give us the kind of art they think we're seeing in everyday life anyway. That kind of idea of the spectacle is very, very important. So unfortunately, I don't want to run any more of your time, and I've just started getting warmed up as well, which is a great shame. And everybody else was too. So thanks a lot for your contributions. But hopefully you can make some of the other sessions, but I have to stop it now because of time. But thank you so much for turning up. Great.
Thank you very much, Mark. We do have time for one or two questions. If anyone in the audience has one, just pop your hand up if you'd like to. No? Otherwise, definitely feel free. Yes, yeah.
Can you explain approbation for me, please?
Approbation.
Yes, when people copy.
Appropriation. Yeah, appropriation. Well, that is a classic postmodern term. And that's a really, really good question, because appropriation was a big term in postmodernism. And that's a kind of post-avant-garde idea as well. In relation to avant-gardism was devoted to original. Why do we love Van Gogh? Because he's so original. But what happened in the postmodern era is a lot of artists started to say, I can't be original anymore. You know, like we've got this legacy of original avant-garde modernism, and now I'm growing up in an art school. I can't come up with stuff better than Picasso or Van Gogh. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to dedicate my practice to being original. I'm going to appropriate what other people do, put it together in a kind of mix and match way, and then be evaluated by how clever and sophisticated I am at putting together different cultural references. So that's appropriation in that sense. And you will know those images, like that famous image by Sherry Levine where she just got a photo of Edward Weston's child. He did a photograph of his child to make it look like a Greek torso, Greek marble torso. And she just got it and did a copy of it and presented it as an artwork. Classic appropriation. So that appropriation is based on a break with the original as being really important at art. These artists are going, no, it's not important. You know, originality, don't worry about it. It's about how sophisticated you are with your cultural readings. And when you think about it, that's a great question, because then it makes me think of the Von Heil painting I showed you before, because in a way, that's all about appropriation, isn't it, you know, in a way. So that postmodern sensibility is still driving things in many ways, even though the theoretical movement itself, postmodernism, it was over when Margaret Thatcher got into power, because then neoliberalism became the new radical kind of ideology, really, which displaced the old left.
One more question.
Do you think if culture and art, like the divide is becoming closer and closer, do you think there's a danger of like art as a concept disappearing altogether?
Well, I think that's another fantastic question. That's exactly what the post-avant-garde is dealing with. And I think the way, art is culture now. You know, like there used to be high culture. If you listen to Mozart, but if you listen to pop music, you didn't have culture. But, you know, that all changed because everything's culture now, and art is culture. And I think that idea that is exactly the question, i.e., well, isn't art going to disappear if it all just becomes like culture? What you get in response to that is you get artists who will continue to produce works that couldn't possibly be considered art, in a way. Whether that's the diamond-encrusted skull by, by Hirst, in a way. I mean, there's nothing in this intrinsically that is art. It's just got diamonds in it, so it's worth a lot of money. But if you have something like a dog run, or there's a work which I'm going to talk about tomorrow, which was a guy called Martin Creed, an Englishman. He won the Turner Prize for an artwork which was a light turning on and off. It was on 5 seconds, it was off 5 seconds. Now, I know it's just like, but the thing is with that, that's exactly your question, like, can this be art? And in fact, the instructions he wrote for that is in the archive at the Tate in London, being protected by air conditioning. You know what I mean? So what makes that art? Well, for a start, the Tate Modern, or whatever it is, as an institution, as an art institution, is treating it as a sacred object. So, you know what I mean? So we could both look at that light and go, no, there's no way that's art. It's just a light being switched on and off. But then when, 6 months later, we both go to the Tate archive and they've got his instructions there, and you're thinking, well, it must be art because, the Tate Modern is protecting it in air-conditioned comfort. So it's that question, will art disappear? It's almost like every time an artist will do something like that. Will you take this as art? It's the same, with this, which is really about art and value. I think it was £50 million. It was some ridiculous amount. And really what this was saying was, and it's for the love of God, right? It's like saying, for the love of God, surely you can't ask £50 million for an artwork. Surely that has pushed, beyond the limits. This is insanity that you could possibly ask £50 million for a work of art. That's pushing what the value of art can be. How much is turning on a light on and off worth? Is it another would be a question of the value of art. And this is again. So, I think Warhol said art is whatever you can get away with, and I think that's really driving a lot of art now. But that is supported by institutions and critics and all of that sort of idea. So yeah, will art disappear? Well, it kind of has in a way, but on another level, it exists by continually asking itself that question.